Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be sharing some more stripe paper that I made with one stamp set, and I'm also going to be sharing how I went ahead and finished two cards using some images that I had already colored in. Now I colored these images on my Arteza Real Brush Pen review. I will leave that link in the top right hand corner if you want to check it out, but I love these so much I went ahead and fussy cut them out, and I'm going to turn them into two cards. I've got some things ready to go. I've got 2.5 inch by 5.5 inch craft panels, A2 side folding card bases, and I have went ahead and picked out some distress inks that match my colors that I used on my ice cream cones. Now I'm using distress inks. I wouldn't suggest this, but these are the colors I had that matched my ice cream cones. If you have other colors of dyeing, that's probably preferable because, as you may know, distress inks don't stamp that well at all. Now, because of that, I'm going to be using my Misty. I've got my Creative Corners, and I'll be using this Waffle Flower stamp set. It's called Plaid Play, and it's got some great stripes in it. I have used this stamp set before. Again, I will leave that link in the top right-hand corner if you want to check out that video. Now, I am starting off with this very large, bold stripe. This is the largest single stripe in the set, and I'm going to place that down on the left-hand side. I'm stamping directly on my card bases. Again, those are white card bases that are A2 in size and side folding. Now, I have my inks lined up in the color order that I will be using them, so I am starting off with this color, and that is Abandoned Coral. So I'm inking at my stamp, and here in just a moment you're going to see why you do not want to stamp with distress inks. And unless you're doing techniques, of course, then that's totally fine and fun. But whenever you try and just stamp with these, they beat up, and you can remedy that by going in with some Versamark ink first, and then they'll stick a little bit better to the stamps. However, I didn't want to do that because inking up with Versamark ink beforehand, each time I was going to stamp these down, that would take forever. So I'm just using my Misty, and I am triple stamping this color. Some of them just need a double stamping, but with this one, I will be stamping it 3 times to get the intensity and the coverage that I want. So I'm stamping that down. I went ahead and placed that where a little bit was hanging off the left-hand side. That's just going to give me a more pattern paper true kind of look, because whenever you go and cut pattern paper, everything is not on the cardstock itself. You've got some images that are half, 3/4 there. You really want to kind of grab that look, and whenever you're making your own pattern paper, and incorporate that. That's just a tip I like to give whenever you're creating patterns or anything like that. Make sure you leave a little bit off the edge here and there. That's going to give you a more true look, and it helps in the long run. The next stripe that I'm going for here, I am using Mermaid Lagoon. This is the thinnest single stripe in the set, and I'm inking that up and stamping it down twice. I have left a little bit of white space. That's just going to add another stripe without me having to do a thing. That's something that I like to do now and again when I'm making my patterns, is add in those little white bits. That way it takes less stamping and it adds another color into your color array that you have going on. Now in this set, this is why I bought this set. I have another stripe set, but it doesn't have this stripe in it, so of course I needed another one. This is like a diagonal line that is, or a bunch of diagonal lines that create their own little stripe here. This is a really, really fun stamp. So I am stamping that in some Dusty Concord, and I stamped it a few times. Now the whole time I am stamping these out, I forgot to switch out my card bases. You're going to see that in a moment and how I went about fixing that. But once I remembered that I had a second card base that I was supposed to be stamping on, I did go ahead and throw that in the mix, and then I'll go back and fix it later on. My fourth stripe that I went in with was some Spice Marmalade, and it is the medium single stripe in the stamp set. Then I'm going to go back through and do my stamping all over again in the exact same order. So I've got my Abandoned Coral with the largest stripe, and I'll stamp that down 3 times to get the coverage that I want. And I am using my Creative Corners in the bottom right-hand corner right now. This little piece right here would make the creative corners completely worth it for my Misty for me, just because, especially with things like this, you need to bump your cardstock away from the edge to get those patterns in. These are stamps that are too large for the paper, and you want them that way so you don't have to worry about exact placement. But when you're using a stamp positioner, it gets a little crazy. So that creative corners bumping it away really saves a lot of time. But you want to make sure that you put your paper in the corner each and every time, or you're going to have a disaster like this. I went ahead and I stamped this down. My paper moved just a little bit and it hadn't been, so I wasn't going back in and placing it down or pushing it back into the corner every time. And I got off a little bit. That's okay. I'm going to go back and just stamp over the other Dusty Concords that I stamped and give them the same look on this card base. This is just an easy fix and it still looks great. I love the look. It's just going to be a different look on this card, but that is going to allow me to just fix my mistake instead of trashing that card base and going back and redoing all that work. Because if you've ever stamped patterns, you know they take some time. So adding in that Misty, and just if you have any mistakes, fix them. Don't just throw it away and start all over. I've had those cards where I've had to do that, and the time that you lose is just ridiculous. So I went ahead and just did that on, or stamped off on my middle stripe on the last card. And this card base, because I didn't do that, I'll just go ahead and keep this one as is. I'm not going to double stamp these. So there's a look at that finished card. I finished off with the orange stripe. And then I'm going to go back in and finish what I forgot on this card. So I finished off the card completely as I would, but I'll just go back and fix where I forgot. You could just leave it as is. It's a beautiful pattern. You could just move your craft piece down to the bottom and have a different layout. But I figured I would go in and just quickly stamp this one out because it was only about 3 stamps that I needed to do really. So I went ahead and added in that offset Dusty Concord stripe to match the other ones that I had messed up on. I'll come back in. I'm working backwards now, so I'll go with my Mermaid Lagoon thin stripe. And finally, I am going to finish off with that Abandoned Coral very thick stripe. I just had to stamp 3 more times. It wasn't that big of a deal to completely finish this card off. And now I've got 2 similar patterns ready to be made into cards. When making videos, I always like to keep in my mistakes to show you how I fix them. And we all make mistakes when card making, so it's just easier to show you how I fix them, give you some creative ideas, and that way you can fix your own cards yourself. So the next thing I wanted to do was add a little bit of texture to those craft panels that I had cut. Again, these are 2.5 inches by 5.5. I have just a Swiss Dots embossing folder, and I ran that through my embossing machine like I would any other embossing folder. No tabs down, 1 cutting plate, embossing folder with the cardstock inside, and then another cutting plate on top. That works for my machine. You might need to play around with your settings a little bit depending on the amount of pressure that you get. And the longer you have your machine, you might need to switch it up too, because as your machine ages, it loses some of that pressure. I am using the Paper Smooches stamp set for my sentiment that has a happy birthday sentiment. I had cut this apart. I do that with a lot of stamp sets, and then when I want to use them again, it's not that hard to go back and mount them together on an acrylic block, or I'm using my Mini Misty here. I have a 1/2 inch by 5.5 inch piece of white cardstock or cardstock strip that I'm stamping my sentiment on, and I'm using some black dye ink. I'm stamping right in the center, and again, I'm using that creative corners to pop that away so I don't have to worry about not stamping on the edge because that was such a thin piece. I'm going to start putting the cards together now. So on my card bases, I am adding those craft panels that I ran through with that Swiss Dots embossing folder. I have some straight adhesive, some very thin double-sided adhesive on the back of these panels. I'm going to place them right down in the center of the paper that my pattern paper that I made myself. Next up, I'm going to start putting down my ice cream cones. Now in my Arteza review, I colored in the same set of ice cream cones 2 different ways. For this set that I'm putting down now, I colored them in with 1 marker, and then I blended out that color with a water brush with just some clean water. And these I stamped in VersaFine Onyx Black ink and heat emboss with clear embossing powder. That's the way I like to do my black embossing. I have a complete video on different ways to do black embossing. I will leave that in the top right hand corner as well for a few different ideas. This is just my favorite way. I am popping these little ice cream cones up with some double-sided adhesive and fun foam. That's my favorite way to add dimension. Use whatever works for you. I'm placing these right in the center of that craft panel, and I'm going to place these a few different ways. I laid these out beforehand, kind of got the idea of where I wanted them to go, and then I put them directly down onto that panel. Now over those ice cream cones, I'm going to put my sentiment strip. Measures the entire length of the card base, so it's going to go all the way across. And I am popping it up again with some dimensional adhesive. I'll place that right in the center of the craft panel, give it a little press down, and I've got that great happy birthday sentiment ready to go on that card. On the second one, again, I'm going to be using the same ice cream cones in the same exact pattern. I have the pattern lined up to match the colors in the background. So abandoned coral, then I'm going to be doing the ice cream cone with the color that matched the mermaid lagoon, and so on and so forth. These are the images that I stamped in black dye ink that was waterproof, and then I came in with my Arteza Real brush pens and I colored them in with just the markers, blending each other out. So a few different colors to blend each other out. Super easy to do. Again, if you want to check that out, go check out the entire review. I went ahead and placed these down. These are a little bit different. I'm going to kind of switch them up just to give them a different look. And I've got that double-sided adhesive again on the back, making sure I give them a good press down because I do have that sort of embossed look on the back or on the craft panel that these are adhering to. You want to make sure you give them a good press so they stay put, especially through the mail. I'm going to add my sentiment strip on this one, same exact way, and then it was time to stamp on the inside. Now I had planned on doing two different designs, that's why you see another stamp off to the right, but I love the way this first one turned out so much. I decided to go ahead and do them both with this ice cream cone stamp set. I'm using abandoned coral and then some, I believe, vintage photo on the bottom. I'm doing selective inking, just eyeballing it. This does not have to be perfect. I'm going to go ahead and stamp that down. And once I pull that up, I've got two different colors of ice cream cone that gives it a more realistic look. Very simple and easy to do and a lot of fun. I like stamping images like that, even when they're not on the inside of my card. I'm pulling the Celebrate stamp from that same Paper Smooches Sentiment Sampler stamp set. I'm stamping that down in some black dye ink on both card bases. You can see I did both ice cream cones on both cards. And then I'm going to add some stripes underneath that. I'm going to make these into little banners, so I added some painter's tape to kind of mask off the area. And then I've got a post-it note so I don't get any ink on the white of my card base. I'm starting off with the Dusty Concord with that diagonal stripe, and then I'll go ahead and add on my Mermaid Lagoon with my very thin stripe right underneath that. And then finally, I am going to add on my Spice Marmalade with the medium stripe, and I didn't add the abandoned coral because I already had that in the ice cream cone, so I left that one out. Then when I pull up this painter's tape, I've got this great banner kind of it's just a great banner, almost looks like washi tape underneath that sentiment to kind of dress up the inside a little bit. That does it for me today. I had so much fun creating these cards, and it was a snap to do. I got to play around and go a little bit more in depth on the background because I already had my images colored and everything from that review. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making these cards, and on the left side of your screen, you're going to see a few different links you can click. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching today, and happy crafting.